On Daf Gimel Amud Aleph, by the two dots, about 20 lines down. Learning as a schus for four shleima filah and chaya baserach. Su Rami Milsa Achriti. Then we asked another question. We had asked the original question of Rav. Now we're asking. They said, if you remember that they met someplace and they said you missed Geshmaka questions. So we did the first question. Now we're up to another question. Surami Milsachrit. They asked another question in the Aliyah. Mi Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav. Chata sheshachta l'shem oila psula. Shachta l'shem chulin kshera. The Mishnah started that karbanis have to be shechted. They have to do the avodas l'shma. It has to be l'shem that carbon. Rav Yehuda Rav says it depends, and we said that a chatas not only is it. We had said that other karbanis it's kosher, but he said a chatas is not alu at all. So Rav said that which Rav said that a chatas that was done shaloi l'shma is not kosher. He says that if it's shachta l'shem oila, it's possible. But if he's shachta l'shem chulin, if he shechted and he didn't think about another carbon, he just thought this is going to be like he's shechting it for supper. The way we shecht, you're just shechting an animal not for kachim at all. Kshera. That machshava doesn't pass. Alma, and he says what the svar is. The mina machraba, the la mina loy machraba. When a person makes a chatas l'shem oila, so it's in the same category. He's making a mistake in kachim, so therefore it's possible. But when he makes a mistake, if he does it shaloi l'shma, l'shem chulin, it's totally out of bounds. It doesn't even affect the lishma. For example, like another way to think about it, let's say someone shechted in chatas l'shem oila, you can understand why that should be shaloi l'shma. But if I said I'm shechting it l'shem Monday, it doesn't mean anything. Monday is not a term that has any relevance here. The same thing if he shechts it l'shem chulin, that doesn't have any relevance to the inyan of shaloi l'shma, and therefore would not possible. They were not possible. So that is the klal, and this is the klal the next blot and a half is going to revolve around, whether something that's from a different category, if you have, and it's going to be in all kinds of contexts, whether the concept that something in the same category will affect, but something in a different category that's not part of the same category will not have any impact. Ramini, I'll ask a question this. Kol haget shenichtav l'shaloi l'shem isha pasal. Any get that was written not having in mind the woman who he's divorcing, right? Ruvain wrote a get. He wrote it l'shem Rachel Klein, who lives down the block, instead of his wife, Rachel Friedman. It's going to be possible. But the mashmaya says it doesn't have to be Rachel Friedman. It could be Rachel Smith, who's not Jewish. Even that would be nami possible. So the Gemara is asking a question. Why is that the case? We just said something that's not in the same category does not affect. So, good morning. So this should be also something that's not in the same category and should not affect. Okay. We're on Daf Gimel. We're just saying over Akasha. The Gemara is coming up to the next Mili Ma'al, another good Shakavatariya. We quoted from Yehuda Marav that he said a klal that something within the same category does affect, something out of its category doesn't. And the actual lashon of this, the mina macharba, the law of mina le macharba. And he said this in the context that if someone brought a carbon, he shechted a carbon, shaloi l'shma, If he does it l'shem, if it was a chatas and he did l'shem oila, that passes the carbon. A chatas is puzzle altogether, like we said in the Mishnah. If it's shaloi l'shma, it's puzzle. But if he does it l'shem chulin, that doesn't puzzle the carbon. That's not considered a shaloi l'shma. It's like we said, because of this rule, something demina machraba, something within its category that has the same nature. So oil and chatas are both carbonis. So having a machshavas oila will pass a chatas, but having a machshavas chulin that he just wants to make it shechtet stamazay will not pass. So we asked from a get that we had said that a get shaloi l'shem isha, if he does it for a different isha, it's going to be pasul, and that means even if he does it l'shem and avodas kechavim, it's pasul. So why is that? That's a steer. Over there we see that shaloi l'shem the lav mina avodas kechavim, a non-Jew is not the same category as a yid. It's a different. It should be equivalent to making a machshava shaloi l'shmat l'shem chulin when you shech the carbon. But even so, we say over there it's possible. So that's what we're up to. V'shani. The Gemara answers, how do we answer this stira? Dal, and this is going to be the next blot and a half on this concept of whether, and it's a little bit, it's admittedly a bit of a abstract concept, and it's going to be applied in all kinds of different contexts. But that's the context, that's the concept that we're discussing, whether something that is of the same category will apply, and something that's not of the category will not apply. It will not, like we say, macharba, it will affect. So we answer this. So how do we answer the stira between kachrim shaloi l'shma l'shem chulin, which is kosher because it's lav mina, and get where it's going to be possible? V'shani get dal avedes kechav mina havalei stama, because we already had on the previous amud that getin. If a person makes a get stam is possible. So even if you remove the avedes kechavim, even if he had a machshavas of an avedes kechavim, so good. So you say that wasn't it's not a machshava that would destroy the get. It's not a shaloi lishma that would destroy the get. But okay, but it remains. He still didn't have the right machshava, and a stam gets written stam is possible. Like we saw from the Mishnah before, from the Gemara before. But we had come to the opposite conclusion, Lagabi Kachim, that if you don't have any machshava, when you do the avodah, like we said before, since it was already this animal was set aside, it was hooked l'shem this carbon, so already there's a designation that this animal is l'shem chatas. So even if he then shechs it without having anything in mind, it will be kosher. We even said that the Chacham Masakin, he shouldn't say his machshava in order not to run into trouble by having the wrong machshava. Okay, V'rama Milsa Achriti. The Gemara asked another question about this concept of the mina machrav, the lav mina loy machrav. Mi amar Rav Yehuda amar Rav, chata sheshachtel shem oila psula shachtel shem chulin ksher. The same concept that we had just asked about before, that a carbon that was brought, that was shechted for an oila, it was a chatas and he shechel shem oila, that's going to passel it, but he does it l'shem chulin. If he doesn't have in mind for any carbon, then it's kosher. Alma demina machraba dala mina le machraba. Again, we see that only something, a thought that's within the same category can have an effect, but the lamina, a machshava of chulin, which is not from the same category, will not affect Vatanya. And now we're going to have to enter into a little bit of tumas. Teichai, beloi teich teichai. The pasuk says, "Kol kli charish asher yipal mehem el teichai, kol asher b'soicha yitma ba'oisai tishvayru." The pasuk tells you, generally, kalim become tamei when you touch them by contact. That's how things become tamei. There's an exception to that tumas mace is matama ba'oil. if it could be metama a kli in that oil. But that we're going to leave in the side for now. The Gemara is going to get to that later. But generally, the way it works is when you touch a kli, it becomes tummy. There's an exception to that a kli cheres has a din that when you touch the outside of a kli cheres, what's inside is unaffected. But on the other hand, whatever is inside a kli cheres becomes tummy. That's what the pasuk is saying. Kol kli cheres asher yipol mehem el toichai kol asher b'soichai yitma. Whatever's inside it will become tummy. That means even if something is just hanging in the air, you dangle something, a piece of fish, and there's a sheretz inside a kli cheres, and you dangle a piece of fish inside the kli cheres, the fish will become tummy because it's inside the kli cheres.
Can you repeat that line one more time? You have a kli cheres.
You have a kli cheres, and
inside of it is
a sheretz. So if you and then you dangle something inside of it, it's within the airspace of the kli cheres. It becomes tamei. There's a special thing that the kli cheres, its airspace. If the kli cheres is tamei, if there's tumah in it, it's metama what's inside of it.
Is that the kli cheres, not
not a metal kli, right?
If you have a fish, what if it's actually inside the kli cheres? That means obviously that would be tamei.
Talking about it is inside the kli cheres.
Actually on the
floor, of course, yeah. And they won't help it at all.
The chiddush is that even if it's suspended in the air, it's also tamei.
Right. But we learn from the pasuk toichai, whatever's inside of it, v'loy toich toichai. So now let's assume this, which the Gemara is going to say also, that this kli cheres is an oven, it's a tanner. If you have a second kli, let's say you have a tall vase, also made out of earthenware, and normally a kli cheres, it's not metama from what's outside of it. It protects what's outside of it from going into inside of it. You have a long vase that you stuck into this oven. This oven has a hole on top, and you put this vase, and it's the top of it is sticking outside, and you have a sheretz inside the tanur, and you have a piece of bread inside this tall vase. So we say toichai v'loy toich toichai, that even though what's inside the oven becomes tamei, what's protected from the inside of the oven by a second kli, there's a vase, something that's in the vase, that doesn't become tamei from what's outside of it inside the tanur. The Gemara says v'afilu kli shatef, and it doesn't have to be just an earthenware kli that's inside of it. Even a metal kli that you have something inside of it will stop. Now, we said this rule that a kli stops what's outside of it from being metama what's inside of it. That's only a kli cheres. We're saying even a kli shetef will stop. So the question is, the Gemara is asking, a kli shetef is not the same min as a kli cheres. This kli that is stopping the tumah from going, the sheretz that's in the tanner, from going into the bread that's inside the vase, this metal vase, it will stop. So we see the lav mina is being machrav. The metal vase is not of the same type as the tanner. It's not, one's a kli cheres and the other one's a kli shetef, the other one's a metal kli, and even so it saves. So this is a stira to our rule that the mina machrava, the lav mina loy machrava. I'm sorry, So we're saying that even though it's the lav mina, it's still, we're saying it has validity to stop the tumah from going into the kli. So this is a stira to it again. So this is like, it's very abstract because we're comparing two extremely different things, but they're both using the same concept. We said lagabi chulin, that when one has a machshava shaloi l'shma of chulin, that's not going to possible because it's a different category and that has no relevance here. But over here we're saying even though metal is different than cheres, kli cheres, it is going to have relevance when the Torah says teichai v'loy teich teichai, that a kli will be mafsek. We're saying even though this is a different material, it's the lav mina, it's still going to be machrav, it's still going to have applicability. B'shani, and the answer, this teretz and sounds more complicated is also chulin etzel chachim kemechitza etzel tana. We said that no, that you're trying to say that a metal kli in a tanur is two separate categories. It's the lav mina. I was answering whether something is of the same category or not is a relative concept. It depends on what the circumstances are. And what the Gemara is trying to say is that they're both kalim. So in that sense, they both are the same min. Chulin legabe kachim is much more of a different min. It's much more of a different category. When you're shechting for food as opposed to shechting for carbon, one's kachim and one's not. This is going to be when you say, so that's more like mechitza etzel tana. If someone, instead of putting into this tana, this charas of tana, instead of putting in another kli, you just put a partition. You put a mechitza like we have in the shul to separate from one part of the kli to another. That's called the lav mina. That taka wouldn't save because that's a totally different thing. So also chulin etzel kachim. Now what you said, chulin etzel kachim is not going to is lav mina. That's going to be as if you put a mechitza in the tana rather than putting a kli. Ma mechitza al tana loy mahanya leklal. Just like putting a mechitza in a tana will not change anything. Av chulin etzel kachim loy mahanya leklal. Where do we see this rule that a mechitza in a kli, as opposed to a kli inside of a kli, will not stop the tumah from going? That's none. Tana shechotzu b'nesar ma'ibirius. If someone took his tana, which is an example of a kli charis, and he divided it with boards or with curtains inside of it, doesn't sound like you'd want to cook anything in such a tana. And then the sheretz b'makom echad. And the sheretz was on one side of the mechitza. Hakol tamei. Even what's on the other side of the mechitza is going to come tamei, because a mechitza is not from the min of a kli, and it has no validity to make a mechitza. Kaveres, and similarly, kaveres pchusa. Kaveres is a type of like wicker basket that they used to use for beehives, and he stuck that into the kli, and it had the holes in it. This basket, and he fixed it with kash, but it's not really usable as a kli anymore. So its only value is as a mechitza. And it's hanging inside the tanner. Sheretz b'seich, and there's sheretz. If there's a sheretz inside this basket, tanner tamei. The whole tanner is tamei. Sheretz b'tanner eichlin shebeseich tamei. If there's sheretz in the tanner, whatever's inside of the kaveres is going to be tamei. Because this is the same thing as a mechitza, an invalid kli. It used to be a kli, but it got a bunch of holes in it, and you stuffed it with straw. It has no value as a kli. It can't really hold anything in it. So it just looked upon as a mechitza. So that will be our explanations. That's our teretz. That we're saying that you try to compare someone who did a kachim l'shem chulin, that we said is going to be, the chulin is not going to damage, it's not considered a machshava shelo lishma because it's lav mina, because it's a different category. It's not similar to the original, to kachim. So your machshava shelo lishma and chulin is not valid. And you wanted to say that should be the same as when you have a kli inside of a kli, that a kli of metal inside of a kli of charas. And you said that's two different things. One is charas and one is metal. And we said no. Those are really similar. They're both kalim. What machshavas chulin is similar to is where you have a mechitza as opposed to a kli, which we taka say that a mechitza will not be mafsek. A kli is mafsek because it is mina. Mechitza is not mina. And we brought from a mishnah that if you have a mechitza, you have a kaveris, that it's not going to be mafsek, and whatever's inside of the tanner is going to disregard this mechitza and make everything inside of it tummy.
It's funny because mafsek's working in opposite directions.
Right.
That's
yes. You have to grasp.
Mafsek by shuma and chulam.
In the end, it helps you because you're doing something destructive.
Right.
Over here, the hefsek is helping you.
Right.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. You're good.
Yeah, but now we're going to reverse on you. Rebbe Lazar mitar. Rebbe Lazar says that this is tar. That if you have a mechitza, even a mechitza inside a kli, it's going to be mitar. And he says a reason for that. Amar Belazav kal v'chaymer. Right? If you have a kayin, if you go into the hospital, right? The kayin, if you close all the doors, you have a mechitza between where the mace is. A kayin could go into the rest of the hospital. It's not considered to be an oil on mace, because a mechitza does stop tumas mace from going from one part to another. So why wouldn't a mechitza that's from tumas mace, which is more chamer than tumas sheretz? So why wouldn't the mechitza inside of a kli also be mafsek? Says this is a side thing, forgetting about our svaras about mina macher, the la mina macher. Says, let's say kal v'chaymer. Amru loi, the Chum said back to him, to Rebbe Lazar. Rebbe Lazar is saying, how could you claim that the Chum said that if you have a kli charis and you put in a mechitza, shul mechitza in the middle of it, it doesn't stop the tumah from going through, because it's lav mina, it's not of mechitza, has nothing to do with the kli.
This way, mechitza not work.
Yeah, so that works for us. So we all understand that. So that was our answer to our question. That we said that chulin, a machshavas chulin is like a mechitza. That's totally separate. But if you have a kli, even if it's a metal kli, that's But now we're still in the brisa now. Right. This is the brisa is having a separate shaklavataria about the Indian of a mechitza inside of a kli. So Rebbe Lezer says, I disagree with you. I think a mechitza in a kli will be mafsik. It will stop the tumah from going. And what's the reason? Because if a mechitza helps, that stops tumas mace from going from one side of the room to the other. If you have a mechitza between the two sides of the room, and tumas mace is more chamer than tumas sheretz. So if you make a mechitza in your kli, it should certainly work. If it works by tumas mace, it should work by tumas sheretz. So Amru Loi, the Chum answered back, Loi, im hitzel b'meisa ha-meis ha-chamor shechein chaluk oy halim, tata b'cheretz ha-kal she'ein chalukim by halim. They said to him, how could you compare? Tumas mace goes by tumas oil. So tumas oil is a structure, right? That if you're inside this same room, then you're tummy. So a mechitza has applicability to an oil. How could you say that therefore a mechitza should have applicability to a kli? Kalim work with kalim, and oihalim works with mechitzas. So the two things are they're not relevant.
Different concepts.
Right.
So it's a half hour ago, so we're just comparing different.
This is in the Gemara. It's like Gemara speaks out. This is Mamish telling you. Yeah. It's going back and forth, saying you're trying to compare two different things. That's what all numbers is saying, looking at the differences in the abstract differences in what a thing really is. So he said, the Gemara asked, oh yeah, it's still working. So this works. So according to the Rabbanan, we've answered our question, because the Rabbanan said that Kalim, you asked the kasha from Kalim, and we answered that by Kalim, this is Kalim by Teich Teichai. We said we have our case of L'Shema, L'Shem Chulin, is more similar to a case of a Mechitza. But according to Rebbe Lazar, a Mechitza is also going to be mafsik. So according to Rebbe Eliezer, how are we going to answer the stira? Rebbe Eliezer ma'ikal nema. So Rebbe Eliezer kal v'chaymer kama. So you say Rebbe Eliezer says there's a kal v'chaymer. So that's his reasoning is specifically over here because we have a kal v'chaymer. It's not because he holds the dafka that the lav mina macherba. He's saying over here there's a kal v'chaymer that overrides it. He said, So he says, how could Rabbi Yehuda Marav say that you have a machshava shaloi l'shem the carbon? He has a machshava that he's shechting it for stamaza, not for kachim. He's saying that's going to be, but he said that's kosher But if he has when he brings a chatzis, he does l'shem oila, it's possible. Chulin, and machshavas chulin is further off from what he's trying to do. At least when he's doing a oil l'shem chatzis shem oila, he intends it to be a carbon. When he does l'shem chulin, he doesn't intend it to be kachim at all. So you should say the same kal v'chaimer, a similar kal v'chaimer, legabi someone who shechted a chatas l'shem chulin. If Rabbi Eliezer says a kal v'chaimer by Toma, you should say the same kal v'chaimer by kachim. Ela time of the Rav Rabbi Eliezer. So you have to say that the reason for Rav, why he says his din over here, and this doesn't mean that Rav doesn't still hold of the mina machrava, the la mina le machrava, but we're saying over here that by the reason why chulin is going to be possible is for a different reason. It's not because of that svara, but it's rather because of a pasuk. To Amar Rabbi Eliezer, my time of the Rav. What's the reason for Rav that he says that chulin, as machshavas chulin will passel a carbon, but yichalu is kosher b'nei Yisrael. Es asher yarimul Hashem. Torah says you should not be mechalo your kodshim that the b'nei Yisrael bring, that you're bringing to Hashem. Kodshim mechalim kodshim ve'ein chulin mechalim kodshim. There's a pasuk that says lo yichalalu, you shouldn't have a machshavas chulin. So it's a direct pasuk that tells you that only kodshim. It's kodshim b'nei Yisrael. It's only when you have a machshavas kodshim, not a machshavas chulin. That's what we learn out from the pasuk. Alma, so Zok the Gemara, Alma also kro afke mekal v'chaimer. So we're saying we have to say that we couldn't say the mina machrba, the la mina le machrba as the justification for Rav's din. We had to say rather from a pasuk, because if we said because of the machshava, we said because of the din of the la mina le machrba, we would have said a kal v'chaimer, that chulin is mochamer, because so we're saying now that the pasuk comes and tells you not to say the kal v'chaimer, right? I would have said a kal v'chaimer if a machshavas oila is machrev. Certainly a machshavas chulin, which is further away. So that we say we have a pasuk, and the pasuk you can't ask a kal v'chaimer.
So knock it off.
Yeah. So hachanami. Now the Gemara goes back to kodshim, to Tuma. Hachanami leisi teichei lafke mikal v'chaimer. We said a pasuk. The teichei v'laf teichei.
Yeah, but that was the possibly different Indian. Like klicharis, and now it's one another. It should be the same.
Well, we learned it out from the pasuk. We said the pasuk says teichei v'loy teichei. That's telling you if there's another pasuk. So it's what you're saying actually is going to be there's going to be a Mand Amar and Amid Aleph who's going to say that way of looking at it. It's two ways of looking at it. You could say the pasuk is just reinforcing the svara, or you could say the pasuk is being mafkia from the svara. But now we're saying, let's say the teichei is telling a fakert from the kal v'chaimer. It's like you would say a kal v'chaimer that like Rabbi Eliezer, that if a mechitza is mafsik by tumas mace, it should certainly be mafsik legabi sheretz. So you say, but no, we have a pasuk that says that if you have something inside of the kli being mafsik, that it's mafsik, and it doesn't make a difference that you have a kal v'chaimer that says that the mechitza should be mafsik. So he says no. The pasuk of teicha is not coming to tell you that chiddush that a kli or a mechitza inside of a tanner is mafsik. It's needing to tell you a different thing. If you have a piece of bread, there's a sheretz in the tanner, and you have a piece of bread that's fully encased in plaster. So it's not inside of a kli, but it just has a covering on it. Let's say you put duct tape all over it. You just covered it that there's nothing exposed around the piece of bread. I'll say since it's not capable of being touched, it also won't become tamei from the avir. So kamashmal, and that's what the pasuk is telling you. I want to say I never would have thought such a thing. I would have thought you either need a kli to be mafsik. I would never think that just because the thing is incapable of being touched, that makes it also incapable of being tamei from tumas avir. You have more sympathy for the rabbanans.
Yeah.
So they're saying like as amigu. They're saying this becomes tamei food really becomes tummy from being touched.
I understand.
So the fact that it's incapable of being touched makes it that it also can't become tummy from tumas
Very
aviyah.
practically, if I have a piece of food that I put some properties in it that coats it outside, so it sits on the walls of an oven. It doesn't sit on the wall of the oven. The food is on the. Why is it any different than a pot? It's also metal surrounding the food. Well, why would it make a difference?
Yeah, I didn't understand your case. If
If I have
it was,
food that's
it's not just that it's not touching over here; it's incapable of being touched. So we're saying that maybe that would preclude it from being able to become tummy. Yeah. Well, yeah, we don't really have any time. So let's start. We'll try. He asked a similar question. Until now, we've been talking about Shini Kodesh. Until now, we've been talking about you make a carbon chatas l'shem oila or shlamim l'shem oila l'shem chatas. Yeah, but there's also another rule that when you shech the carbon, it has to be l'shem the bailam. You have to have in mind who the owner. You have to have the right owner in mind. So he asked a question on that topic, or Mishad. Yeah, we're going to stop over here because, yeah, not going to do justice if we continue.